Welcome back to the Not Just a Pony Ride podcast. Thanks for listening today. We have an episode that we usually do kind of an on-the-road situation when we come back from conferences, and we have been so busy these last couple of months traveling and educating and doing the stuff that we love to do over at HETRA University. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today because we just got back from the great state of Minnesota. They hosted us there, the River Valley Riders. Very accommodating. They put on a great conference.
They did.
We went and checked out their facility, and they're kind of in the process of kind of building their dream facility out there. So that was really cool to see. And they were able to host us for a few sessions out there. So that was great. Always learn a lot when I go to conferences and interacting with people. But one of the biggest things I think that we take away when we go present somewhere is sometimes the questions that we get, right?
Oh yeah, 100%.
So it kind of gives me a gauge of like what information our industry is really looking for in the questions that we get. And that pops up in obviously all of our presentations. I did a presentation at Region 6 on seizures, understanding seizures, and we had a lot of really good attendance and questions and things there too. But today we're going to talk about a specific question that Shelby gets a lot when she does her equine based education, and you did equine strategic planning, right?
I did, yeah.
So, as part of equine strategic planning, one of the things you talk about is when you're doing like intake of a horse and finding out what works best for you as a center in regards to like purchase, lease, or donate, right? If you're going to take a horse on either of those three. What are the kind of the pros and cons of each of those things, I guess?
Sure. So, obviously in a purchase or a donation situation, there's a pro and a con of now you own the horse,
Right.
right? So, one of the pros of that is that obviously you have full autonomy of what's happening with that horse. You don't have to worry about keeping an owner updated or making sure you're using the right farrier or whatever that might be if an owner has a specific preference. But a con of that might be if we have a horse who doesn't work in our program or needs to retire, they're ours. So we have to be really proactive about making sure we have a plan for either can we sell that horse? Can we retire that horse to different type of programming, or is that a horse that's going to have to stay on our payroll after they're retired? So that's kind of a pro and a con to both of those. Obviously, a con to purchasing versus donation is that we have to pay for them.
Right, money.
Yeah, so you have to have the money to be able to purchase and spend that upfront cost. And then
horses aren't cheap right now.
Horses are not cheap right now. Although the initial purchase price is probably the cheapest thing you're going to pay, if we're being honest. So, so that's one thing. For leases, I would say pros are, we have access to a lot of horses that if an owner is wanting to keep a horse on a lease, generally it's because they have a sentimental attachment or they really care about that horse. So knowing you have kind of a partner in that horse's life. If that horse needs to retire or needs special care, you have somebody that you could go to and ask for additional support or retire that horse back home. A con of that would be obviously we have to make sure those are positive relationships, which I think a lot of times they can be. We just have to make sure that we are keeping up on that. Paperwork is for us is about the same because we have we only sign lease paperwork once. So we have a kind of it basically has no end date. It has termination
perpetuity.
Yeah, termination clauses, but it's not, we don't have to sign lease paperwork every year. So it's about the same for some centers that sign lease paperwork every year. That can be a con is you have to upkeep that paperwork. Whereas with donation or purchase, you have one set of paperwork. From like budgeting and money sense standpoint, if you own the horse, you should be putting that horse on your depreciation spreadsheet, or taking that horse as an asset and allocating that some way. So making sure you have somebody that understands the horse world to be able to do that appropriately. Whereas leased horses, that's not something we have to worry too much about.
Yeah, it's like a rental.
Yeah,
You don't get to claim it as an asset.
exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So I think those are some of the pros and cons of them. I guess for us, um, if we're going to take a horse on lease, we really like to ensure that the person that we're entering that relationship with is going to be a positive relationship. Because having a hard horse owner it makes it not worth it to have the horse,
Yeah, it makes it
honestly.
hard. Mhm.
So we actually have over the last few years gone a lot more towards donation and purchases than I think we ever have. I think
Mhm.
we own more of our horses either through donation or purchase now than we ever have in the
Mhm.
past. In the
Mhm.
past, we've had 80% of our horses on lease and a
Mhm.
very small number we've owned. And I would say now we're probably close to 50-50. We might even own a few more than we
Then we
currently
lease.
lease. Yeah.
Interesting.
I'd have
Okay.
to look at that number.
So I think that any of these options are good options for people that are looking for good horses. And obviously, that's something we need to do our jobs, right? But looking into lease agreements is kind of what we're going to talk about today. A little bit more. And so I have our agreement kind of in front of us, and we're going to go through it just a little bit. Obviously, everything that we talk about works for us. So, take pieces or parts of this and make it work for you, but just kind of some food for thought if you're considering doing some lease agreements with your horses in your own center. First of all, you should be having someone reviewing these kinds of
Yeah.
documents, right?
Somebody versed in legal
Yeah,
jargon and understands
knowledge.
the law. Yeah.
Because
In your state.
yeah, in your state, that's a big
Yeah.
thing too. Like our lease agreement's not like terrible; it's like 3 pages long, so it's not a crazy amount of information, but there is some stuff in here that before I put my eyes on this, I was like, oh, that's good, information to have in there. So we're going to kind of go through that a little bit today, but make sure you have someone look at it with a trained eye so that you're protected and the owner is protected too.
Yeah. And I think that's a big thing with any sort of contract that you're doing is you want to make sure that both parties are protected. And that's big in the lease agreement because this is a long-term agreement, but
Mhm.
it's also big in your donation and your purchase agreement is making sure that both parties are protected should something go awry.
Right. This episode is sponsored by Killian Insurance Agency. Killian Insurance Agency proudly serves the EAS and EAP communities, offering insurance solutions tailored to your unique needs. They provide coverage for therapy horses, equipment, camps, events, and facilities while addressing the specific liability concerns of your programs. Whether you operate an EAS center, provide EAP services, or manage a ranch or farm without these programs, they're here to protect your work. If you're new to the EAS or EAP industry, they can guide you through the coverage process. Contact Killian Insurance Agency today to discuss how they can help safeguard your critical impact that you make on individuals and communities. Find them at www.farmequineinsurance.com or at the link in the show notes. So, kind of the first things on here are just like the basics of what that lease agreement is. And I see some boxes on here for percentages. Do you want to explain what that means? Because this is a care lease, right? Not like they're not, we're not paying them for the horse.
Right.
It's care based.
Right. So when we take a horse on lease, we assume 100% of that horse's care costs. With doing that, we also assume 100% of the responsibility of that horse's care. So if we have an owner that we're entering into an agreement with and they say, well, I'm going to lease you my horse, but I want you to only use this farrier, then we would tell that owner, great, we're going to expect you to cover the costs of continued farrier care, schedule the farrier appointments, be here to handle the horse for the farrier appointments so that we're not expecting our horse team to navigate a different different
Nuances,
farrier and
yeah.
all of those things. Most people don't have an issue with a horse changing farrier vet or whatever. And honestly, that would be a reason we would not enter into agreement. But that is something on there that we have encountered in the past. And then in addition to that, from percentages, is we have kind of it's not really a program, but opportunity sometimes for some of our volunteers to purchase horses. So it might be that they have volunteered with us for a long time and they really want their own horse that they can come out and they can ride once a week or groom, or their grandkids can come and, ride when they're here in the summer, whatever it might be. But they maybe aren't necessarily equipped to own a horse themselves, whether that be from a care or from a cost standpoint or from a just education standpoint. They don't really know the ins and outs of owning a horse.
Or they live in an apartment.
Right. And don't want to pay board. Yeah. So that's a situation where the volunteer works with our horse team and we determine what number one, if it's a good fit, because we know a lot of our volunteers this would not be a good fit with. So we want to make sure again that relationship is positive. And then they really work with our volunteer or our horse team on what the current need is. So what's the volunteer looking to do? Because if they're looking to go out and trail ride out in the pastures 3 times a year themselves, that's different than if they want to bring their grandkids out and tote their grandkids around, so yeah, exactly. So what exactly they're looking for, what are the current program needs, and then how do those two things marry together? And then it comes down to what's the budget. So what's the volunteer's budget to spend, because they do pay 100% of that upfront purchase price for the horse. So is it $2,500 or is it $12,000? Kind of what are we working with? And then also, is the horse that we're looking for going to fit within that budget? So, if they're looking for something that is a draft cross and they want to learn how to carriage drive, but they only want to spend $2,500, we know that's not going to be feasible. And so that kind of that conversation just kind of ends because we know that's not a reasonable expectation. So then once we have the horse purchased, then generally what we do is we sign a lease agreement, and the HETRA pays 100% of the costs up front for the horse's care. And then we are able to work with the owner and they basically reimburse us for 25% of that cost. Okay. So we invoice them every month, 25% of what the horse's board is, 25% of if they had a farrier visit or a vet appointment or extra supplements or whatever that is.
And that's because those volunteers are also using their horse for their own personal use outside of programming time.
Right.
It's nice to have that option because then, you still have a little bit more autonomy in that. And I think some owners probably appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And it is nice if you have somebody that kind of like what you're talking about, Katie, where maybe there's a couple times a year where you guys want to go out on a weekend camping trip or something like that and want to be able to take him with you. And it is nice to be able to have that option for some people, for sure.
So that's kind of the first part of this, is talking about that percentage and like what HETRA agrees to do and what the owner agrees to do and that kind of a thing. The next section on our lease agreement is kind of like how the horse is going to be cared for at HETRA. As far as like it is going to be participating in programming with, children and adults with disabilities, and that we do a lot of conditioning and training, and the volunteers are trained that handle them, and kind of goes into a little bit about our policies on that end of things.
And how the horse will be housed. Like one big thing that we really try to avoid is having an owner dictate how we house horses, because we all know horses need different things. And when they move environments, sometimes an indoor and outdoor environment is better for them. And so we've had situations in the past where we have show horses who have been show horses their whole lives, and the owners say, well, I really only want them stalled. And we get them here and we're like, well, this horse hates their stall. And so we are able to talk with the owner and say, hey, they're much happier outside, and we've got a safe living environment for them outside, and kind of able to make those decisions.
The next kind of section is just about like if you want to come and ride or you want to take your horse or that kind of thing, because we don't want owners showing up. It's fine if they want to do that, but we don't want them showing up on Monday morning when we have a whole afternoon of programming scheduled for that horse, Monday afternoon. So kind of some hour and day stipulations and things like that.
Yep.
To keep us protected. And then the last part is like a termination of lease agreement or, discharge. which I know is a big pro for lease agreements, is that retirement plan, if that should happen, or if it's just not a good fit, that we know that horse has a good home to go back to.
Yep.
Do you want to talk through a little bit about like nuances of that? What happens if?
Yeah. So, in ours, it's really important that you have a termination clause in your lease agreements, no matter how you're writing them. Even if you're doing like a closed date
Mm-hmm.
lease and it's for 12 months or whatever, you really also need to have the option in there for either party to get out of that at any given time,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the scenario. So, what ours says is that at any point during for the duration of the lease, the owner can choose to terminate the lease with 60 days notice to HETRA. And that basically gives us enough time. So the owner comes to us, says, hey, we're moving and we want to take Skippy with us. And we're going to need to go ahead and pull him for the program. We ask they give us 60 days notice so that we're able to get the participants that horse usually works with and move them to another caseload or figure out alternative programming or whatever that might be, and not have to be eliminating programming because we're losing a horse.
Right.
So that's really important to us. And then if the situation arises, and say we had this happen a couple years ago where we had a horse who had literally just passed training. I think he had one participant on his caseload, and the owner came to us and life changes had happened. They lost their trail riding horse. They wanted to bring him home. And we just said, you know what, come and take him, because
Yeah.
he's not really actively
Mm-hmm.
participating. So it made more sense
He didn't have
just
a ton of riders,
yeah,
so that makes
it didn't
sense.
make sense for us to pay to
Keep
house
him.
him and feed
Mm-hmm.
him for another 60 days. So you really just have to take those each circumstance as it comes. And then on the flip side of that, our termination agreement on HETRA side says that HETRA will can terminate the lease with 14 days written notice at any given time. Um, 14 days seems like a short period of time, but also if we have a horse that we know is not working out for us, we need to be able to move that horse on. And hopefully it's not a shock to the owner,
Right.
right? We try to make sure that if we're having struggles with the horse, whether that be from a behavior or soundness standpoint or whatever, that the owner is kind of being
In the
kept in the
loop.
loop.
Yeah.
So that if we say, hey, no, this isn't working out anymore, they're not shocked by
Mm-hmm.
it. And then the third piece of that is that we have a clause in there that says if we deem a horse dangerous, destructive, unsafe to be on our property for any given reason, either to themselves or a person, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that horse is to be removed from our property within 48 hours. And we have some alternative options that we can help with in
Mm-hmm.
those situations. But that is a really important thing, because
Yeah.
if you have a horse that for whatever, he breaks
Yeah.
your fence. He's every single time you turn him out, he goes and he breaks
Mm-hmm.
your fence and he gets out on the road. Like
Mm-hmm. It's
that's not
dangerous.
safe for
Yeah.
him. It's not safe for us. It's destructive. It's expensive, and it
Yeah.
runs a high risk of somebody getting hurt.
Right. And just having that language in there, I mean, obviously we're going to bank on not having to use it, right? But
Right.
having that language protects you and protects the owner as well. So having some of those things in there, we don't always think about, but good stuff to have. So, and that's kind of the end of it. Honestly, it's just kind of that basic information and in acquiring the things we need to treat that horse the best we can, um and enter into that agreement with peace of mind, knowing that everybody understands the expectations and what's going to happen while their horse is here and hopefully happily working with
Yeah,
us.
absolutely.
So, Shelby, are you comfortable sharing some of these things from our lease agreement with our listeners?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, so what I'm going to do is if you are a Patreon subscriber, so that's our educational community online that has access to free webinars and free resources and all of that, it's just $5 a month to subscribe. So I'm going to release that to our Patreon subscribers this week as part of this episode, but it will also be in our Patreon shop. So if you don't want to commit to the subscription, but you do want to check out our lease agreement, you can still go over to Patreon and just see that lease agreement piece with a one-time purchase instead of a subscription. So
One thing I do want to add on to that, Katie, is this is a legal document.
right.
So if we're happy to share this information, but please, please, please read this thoroughly.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure if you're going to use language, it makes sense for your center and it makes sense for the laws that you must abide by at your place of residence.
All right. Well, thank you for sitting down with me, Shelby, again. Like I said, we just got back from Minnesota, Region 6, and we're gearing up for HETRA University Live this weekend.
Yeah.
So more to come on that and the education and questions and stuff that's happening around here. So until next time, everyone. That's all for today. But until the next episode launches, scroll down to the show notes and click on the link to get plugged in with us on Facebook, Instagram, or our exclusive educational club at Patreon. This podcast is presented by HETRA University, the educational arm of Heartland Equine Therapeutic Riding Academy in Gretna, Nebraska. HETRA University's mission is to provide high-quality educational offerings to the EAS community. Check out all the HETRA University has to offer at www.hetrauniversity.org.